Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Barasaid, and I am the president of the America-Israel Friendship League. Brings me much pleasure to join you here today and to introduce this webinar. Frankly, I think we've already lost count how many webinars for the period of the last 2.5 years. The America-Israel Friendship League has been streaming these webinars once, twice a week on a multitude of different topics and issues, with the goal essentially of introducing Israel and Israelis, what Israel is all about, bringing to you the many different facets of Israel that really make it such a unique country, starting from the arts, the culture, the sites, the virtual tours, the technology. Over the course of the last year and a half, also every other month or so, we are joined by our, I would like to call him my friend, Yossi Vardi. Yossi is really pretty much synonymous with technology and with development and with the industry of Israel going back however many decades, receiving, I think, numerous different prizes on all walks of life. And he's really, he is synonymous with the development also of Israeli technology. And every other month or so, he joins us live for a fireside chat to bring different aspects of Israeli technology, talking with really some of the more unique innovators and leading researchers that there are. And so with that, without further ado, I'd like to transfer the baton over to Yossi.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody, wherever you are. Greetings from Israel. Tonight or today, it's evening in Israel. It's, I guess, midday in the East Coast. It's morning in the Pacific area, and it's night in the Far East. So good whatever to everybody. To this evening or today or this session, I have really a pleasure to introduce to you Professor Yaakov Nahmias, or as we call him in Israel, Professor Kobi Nahmias from the Hebrew University. Professor Nahmias is really one of the most innovative and but also practitioner of high tech. He brings the results of scientific research into the field. He's heading the Center for Bioengineering in the Hebrew U, but he's not ending with R&D, but he also, as I mentioned, take it to the field. He's involved in a number of very interesting projects, and tonight we will go deep into one of them, and maybe we will mention another one or two in a more condensed way. And he belonged to the class of people in Israel, which I say they really break the barrier between science fiction and high technology, because what they do sounds more as a science fiction, but at the end of the day, they are able, he and his friends, able to come with great innovations. We saw some of them in the past sessions, and I hope that during the year we will bring you more and more of these amazing researchers / developers / entrepreneurs / founders who are really pushing the cutting edge of technology. So Kobi, it's really a great pleasure to host you, and I will start by asking you to give us a rapid description of your career and how you arrived to this very exciting position of the head of the Center of Bioengineering. So Kobi, please go ahead.
Thanks, Yossi, and welcome everybody for joining us. I say that we have more than 100 people directly linking to our Zoom fireside chat, so I really appreciate it and appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody. Jonathan described Yossi Vardi as being synonymous with technology in Israel. I would say he's the actual forefather of all of the biotechnology and high-tech startups in Israel. So it's a great honor to be interviewed here in this room with Yossi. So my name is Yossi Nahmias. I'm a chemical engineer by training. I grew up in Bat Yam, south of Tel Aviv. After I served in the army, I went to the Technion, that's Israel Institute of Technology, where I graduated as a chemical engineer, magna cum laude. I have another degree in biology. I worked in the laboratory of Professor Mizrahi there, developing during my undergrad the solid formulation of insulin that was very exciting to take from very basic concepts to a patent that was licensed to Novartis a few years later. And then I got a remarkable opportunity to do some of my undergrad in the United States. And I flew to Minnesota and I fell in love with the state. Yes, I know it's cold. I actually flew during the winter. But it was a lot of fun. I got to work there in one of the best chemical engineering departments in the world. And I really wanted to go back, so I applied for graduate studies there. And I ended up after the Technion to go and do my PhD at the University of Minnesota. At the time, I don't think I realized how few Israelis or Jews in general we have in Minnesota, but it was very exciting. I worked on laser-guided direct writing, essentially the first application of 3D printing for biology. Developed one of the first high-resolution printing of cells back in 2004, I think, a very long time ago, and got to meet people from Boston Scientific and Medtronic. Minnesota is really this hub of medical devices. Then right there, I met my wife. That was easy because she was the only brunette in a state full of blondes, and moved with her to Boston. She just started doing her law degree in Boston, and I joined Harvard Medical School, first as a postdoc working with Martin Yarmush at the Center for Engineering and Medicine, which is part of Harvard Medical School, and more specifically Mass General Hospital, which is the biggest medical research center in the US. I worked on a lot of different things. First on liver tissue engineering, how to take liver cells and make them functional for a long time. And then I worked on hepatitis C. And I had the remarkable opportunity to get a career award from NIH, the National Institute of Health, and essentially become a faculty in Harvard Medical School, which was a great honor then as it is now. I took a molecule from basic principles to a clinical study in Minnesota and developed one of the first organ-on-chip technologies on the market that was licensed to Urel. And then when I was looking for the next opportunity, I got a call from the Hebrew University, invited me to come back to Israel and start a new department of bioengineering. So like a good American, I said, I'll think about it. But the second I closed the phone, I told my wife that we should start packing because there's no way I'm missing this opportunity. We're missing this opportunity.
So we flew back.
That was 2009. And it took us a year to finish everything we did. And then in about 12 years ago, in 2010, I flew back with my wife to Jerusalem, to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and started a new center for bioengineering. So for those of you who don't know Israel and ask, why would you leave Harvard for Hebrew University?
Why would you leave Harvard for Hebrew University, Kobe?
Like it's the Hebrew University is the Harvard of Israel, right? This is the university that was founded by Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud, it was also founded by Chaim Weizmann. So it's one of those universities that if it calls, you come calling, right? It actually spun off Tel Aviv University and Beersheba and Haifa. All the universities in Israel were founded by the Hebrew University, which actually predates the state by more than 30 years. The first lecture in Israel was given by Albert Einstein on the rocks outside the city of Jerusalem. All the students were sitting, he was standing, and he gave a lecture in 1921 on the theory of relativity. So you don't say no to an institute like that. And I came over and raised funding from the Alexander Grass Foundation, who were incredibly kind and gave us an endowment to establish the Center for Bioengineering in Israel. And then from then we opened the Israel Biodesign Program, and the rest is history.
Kobi, personal question, your wife is an American or Israeli?
A little bit of both, like me.
No, but when you met her?
So Michal moved to the States with her parents when she was 11. And then she grew up in the States, changed her name to Michelle. And when she was 18, she decided to come back to Israel and volunteer in the IDF. So she served in the Air Force and then went back to the US, started studying economics. And when I founded the student organization, she came to, I organized a demonstration for Israel. And she came to draw signs. So, like I said, I actually took the only Israeli in Minnesota and married her.
And how, another side question, how did you get used to the weather in Minnesota?
You don't.
Pardon?
You don't, Yossi. You know, even Minnesotans don't get used to the weather in Minnesota. They move to Florida.
Somebody told me that the Jewish people in Minnesota are the frozen chosen, but that's a different story. So let's get back to Hebrew. By the way, you mentioned the merits of the university. I think it will be appropriate to mention that our first president and one of the founding fathers of Israel, Professor Chaim Weizmann, was also a chemist. So you arrived to Hebrew U in 2010, and they told you, Kobi, it's very nice to have you. Now go and start from nothing a center of bioengineering. Can you please share with us what happened in the 12 years since then?
Wow. So one of the first things we did is I joined up with Chaim Lotan, who was the director of the Heart Institute in Hadassah, and Dan Galai, who was the dean of the business school. And we brought the program from Stanford University called Biodesign. It's a program where we're taking physicians from Hadassah and bringing them together with engineers from my program, from bioengineering, and with MBA students. And so they get business, engineering, and medicine. And we take them and we throw them into the hospital to find unmet clinical needs. And then we bring them back, we do a market analysis, we build a patent, build a technology, teach them how to submit a patent, how to do a business plan. And it was incredibly successful. The program was born about 10 years ago. 2012. And since then, we launched about 7 different medical device startups. One of them, Guiding Medical, got FDA approval 3 years ago. A few others are already in clinical studies, and others are in animal studies. We got Boston Scientific to sponsor the program, the British government. We got a large company from Japan to sponsor it, Terumo. And more than the companies itself, we launched about 200 young Israeli entrepreneurs into the marketplace. And they did some really interesting things. So one of our first graduates actually founded Scopio, and others actually ended up in companies that I founded later down the line. So it was an incredible program.
Good. Can we move now a little bit to your projects where you are also the founder and the entrepreneur?
Of course, so about 5 years ago, I was in a sabbatical in MIT, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine who asked me what I thought about cultured meat. So cultured meat is the concept of, instead of growing meat in an animal, taking cells from an animal and then expanding them in a bioreactor and harvesting the bioreactor like we harvest yeast or yogurt for that matter, and essentially making this into meat. So the first demonstration was in 2013 by Mark Post, who made this cultured burger that was okay to taste, and it cost about $2 million per kilogram. So when they asked me what I thought about it, I told them it was probably the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. And the reason is because I spent more than a decade with the advising for the pharmaceutical industry, consulting for them. And when you grow cells, they are self-limiting. So cells produce waste products, specifically ammonia, that kills the cells, and then you can't grow any more cells. And it happens at relatively low levels of density. It happens with no matter what you're growing in a vessel. So for example, when you're growing yeast, when you're making wine, your yeast are going to expand, and then they're making too much alcohol, which is a waste product for yeast, and then the alcohol kills them. Luckily for us, then at the end, you actually have a glass of wine. The problem is that when cells like beef or lamb or chicken, when cells are doing it, they're not making alcohol, they're actually making ammonia. So at the end, you have a very concentrated glass of urine. Nothing you want to eat. So you have to, harvest the cells before they die, and it's not a very efficient process. So my friend and the investors were pretty upset about that. But then I had an opportunity to sit down on the Charles River and then think about it. And one of the things that I figured out is that animals don't have the same problem. They actually have a liver that actively removes the waste products. So I sketched it out, but we built essentially a rejuvenation system that can actively remove the waste products from the bioreactor and essentially allow cells to grow to cell densities that nobody else saw in industry, about 10 to 20 times higher than the standard, making the entire thing
cost-efficient. A reactor with a liver.
I made a bioartificial liver to a bioreactor, yes. And I brought the technology back home, and then about a year later, met the chief scientific officer of Tyson Foods in the Technion. We sat down for lunch. He was telling me, look, I heard about this. I don't think it makes any sort of sense. And I told him, I know. That's why, and then I showed him my design, and he said, wow, that's the first idea that makes sense. And Tyson Foods became the first investors in the technology. And when the CEO of their venture arm came to Israel, we took 2 drops of chicken cells, put them on a burning coal, and showed him how the entire restaurant suddenly smelled like burned chicken. And that was it. I founded a company about 4 years ago, and we raised a seed investment that was supposed to last for 2 years, and we hit the milestones out of the park in the first year. Then raised a Series A that was the largest in industry, and again, supposed to be 2 years, and in a year and a half, we blew through the milestones. And just recently, this January, we raised $300 million, which is the largest Series B in the sector. And we are now about 85 people, both in Israel and the United States, and one of the fastest growing company in this sector.
And where do you stand in the process? Are you still in R&D? You began the proof of concept. You are towards commercialization. What is more or less, where do you stand?
So maybe I think Jonathan has a video from Future Meat Technologies. Maybe this is the time to show the video.
Great, we love videos.
Our friends can do that.
Hell. No more burgers have been cooked up by mankind than the amount of grains of sand in the Mojave Desert. Give or take a few happy meals. But this story ain't all smiles. You see, in the past decades, animal agriculture has grown way out of hand. And now, well, everybody's scrambling for a sustainable alternative. Some even went as far as to make meat out of plants. Well, they're fine, you know, for what they are. You can't put a cowbell on a soybean, call it Bessie, and expect it to taste like meat. Scientifically speaking, we don't want to settle for alternatives. No, sir, that's not how we do things in the 2020s. What we're looking for is a real solution. And enough of me and my yapping. Now here's a gent by the name of Kobe, and he's going to tell you all about the future of meat now.
Our special recipe grows right here, in these bioreactors.
Yeah, well, those remind me of my grandpappy's old moonshine stills.
They do. Teaching chicken and beef cells to grow in simple stainless steel vessels like this one was a major breakthrough, which dramatically lowered our capex. Just one tank like this one can make a cow in 6 days.
Well, I'll drink to that.
What would really knock your socks off is that we no longer need to harm a single cow or any farm animal for that matter. The proprietary cell lines we developed are immortal without any genetic modifications. Meaning we have a non-GMO product that can grow forever and feed the entire world.
Holy cow, that's a miracle.
And our secret sauce, the one that makes all of this cost-effective, is something we call media rejuvenation, a proprietary nanofiltration system, which you hear right now, that allows us to recycle the feed and get the best bang for your buck. Together with other innovations in our cell feed, we have become the industry leader in cost. But Future Meat Technologies is not only about the price on the package, it is also about the taste of the bite. And we make sure that our product is nothing short of mouth-wateringly delicious. This is why we focus on fat. Fat is the sizzle of the burger, the smell of grilled meat that we recognize a mile away.
Pardon me, do you have any hot sauce for this?
Yeah, but aren't you 7,000 miles away?
Oh, that's right, I forgot. Never mind.
This isn't a pipe dream or a vision. It is a call to action. Our technology is ready. It's cost-effective, sustainable, and completely scalable. We are way ahead of the pack. Our innovation can bring forth the next agricultural revolution, and it has never been closer to reality.
Easy, baby, easy. You know, that Kobe, he's got a lot of what we cowboys call chutzpah. And that's just what you need if you're gonna change the world. They started out with a $250,000 burger when their journey began. But 2 years later, they got it down to $7.50. $3.90? $3.90. $3.90. Well, that's a hell of a deal already, isn't it? A new day's on the horizon. A good day to claim new frontiers. You know, progress isn't a journey, no. It's a race. Technology's already here. Now it's time to put the pedal to the metal. Say, how about you, partner? Well, we already gave you a little taste of what's to come. You ready to ride? Yeah? Get up!
Great. Kobe, I think that you should consider another career.
I was horrible.
in the cowboy movies. Kobe, what is kind of the time horizon of the project? When do you think you will be fully commercial?
So the company's name is Future Meat Technologies. And the Series B funding raise was January this year. And we raised enough funding to start building a large production facility in the United States. So we're probably going to have shovels in the ground before the end of the year, in the last quarter. The application to the FDA is in process. We expect to get regulatory approval in the first half of 2023 and be in the supermarkets in 2024. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to restaurants before that. Probably in the second half of 2023, you're going to start seeing us in a couple of restaurants in the United States. And if the Ministry of Health in Israel moves as fast as the FDA, maybe we'll see it in a few restaurants in Israel as well. One question that was asked, is it going to be kosher? Definitely, it's going to be kosher. The chicken, the beef, and the lamb are going to be kosher. There are other animals which are probably not going to be kosher. The biggest question is whether it's going to be parv. So is it meat or parv is a big theological question that would love to talk about, but maybe at a different time, maybe in the Q&A session.
Can you at this point share with us what is going on in the space in general? Because we know there are a number of companies, I think in Israel now there are about 20 initiatives or so in this space in all kinds of things, using other sources of protein, using pea, using other protein alternatives. Can you give us just a very quick run on the industry at large?
Yeah. So
of meat replacements.
So meat alternatives have been with us for the last several thousands of years, right? Tofu is exactly that. It's a meat alternative. And there is mock meat that was available in China for many years, and it's still a staple. The modern fascination with meat alternatives started when two companies were founded and launched. One of them was Beyond Meat, that was based on pea protein and had a remarkable IPO a few years ago that launched the company's valuation to $10 to $14 billion. They crashed a little since then, but they definitely showed it was possible. And a different company called Impossible Foods that, again, is using soy protein and so again, plant proteins for a vegan product. This time it has something called legomoglobin. So it's a genetically engineered protein that makes the hamburger bleed a little bit. In Israel, there's a lot of companies that are moving in that direction. And one of them is Redefined Meat. Essentially, they're using 3D printing to create this texture of beef that is not a burger. It's more of like a pulled steak, or maybe even a large piece of meat, like like a fillet. There are also a couple of companies like Piece of Meat and Chunky that are doing something similar in that area, creating texture of meat. The biggest problem with all of those plant-based alternatives is that they get the texture right, really correct. I love Beyond and Impossible, and Redefine, I hear, is getting excellent reviews. The problem is that the flavor and aroma are not really there. It doesn't taste exactly like meat, to the point where I'm fine with a Beyond cheeseburger, but my kids don't like it at all. I have 5 kids. The oldest is 11. They know when daddy is trying to feed them something that is not real meat. So this is where cultured meat shines, right? Because we grow the cells that give you not only the texture, but also the aroma and flavor of meat. And the first company in Israel that was founded was actually Aleph Farms. Aleph was founded by a good friend of mine, Shulamit Levenberg. They're using stem cells, and they're doing 3D printing of cells. And then Future Meat Technologies, which is our company, is actually using fibroblasts and doing things that are more cost efficient, I would say. We're really leading the race in cost. We brought the prices down to about $1.40 for chicken breast, about $2 for a burger. So the prices, for when it comes to price and process, we're really leading the pack. The other company that is out there is also doing 3D printing is Meatech, which is actually listed in the Israeli stock market and on NASDAQ. They are a little bit behind us. They were founded more recently, and they're really using 3D printing technology to try to create their stake. There are other companies that are around that ecosystem. So there are companies like Wilk, for example, that is producing proteins, milk proteins. Remilk is probably leading there. She just got FDA approval. They are actually making milk proteins and making a product that can make cheese and can make milk that is actually milk and not soy milk or almond milk. But the proteins are coming from fermentation, from bacterial fermentation, or fungi fermentation, I think. And there are companies like Wilk that are trying to make more complex breast milk, for example, from cells. And they're also, as far as I remember, they raised some of their funding from the stock market as well. From the Hebrew University, there are other plant-based companies, and one of them is Savor It, that was founded by Oded Shosayov, a good friend of mine. And you know Oded very well as well. So Israel is really
I think also some work is being done. Some work is being done by Professor Levenberg in the Technion.
Yeah, that was Aleph Farms. That's the first company I mentioned, Shulamit Levenberg.
So where will you put Israel in the ranking of activity in meat alternatives? So
I can tell you that in 2022, Israel raised $600 million for investment in food tech. And we were leading the pack. We were up until more recently, up until the recent raise for Upside, we were the country that raised the most dollars for meat alternatives. It was either us or the US, and we were leading the pack until 4 weeks ago. $350 million out of that was Future Meat Technologies, so the company that we just spoke about, so the company I founded, but yes, we were definitely leading the pack. So I think there is incredible innovation in Israel, which is second to none.
I must tell you that there are tons of questions and remarks at the chat. I don't think we will be able to answer all of them, but somebody asked about the reaction of the beef growers, beef manufacturers, traditional, incumbent, how they react to what you are doing.
So like I said, Tyson Foods was actually one of our first investors. And then ADM, which is the world's largest food ingredient company, led Series B. Monde Nissen invested in us early on, and we have Mueller and Rich. We're the first company to actually sign a joint development agreement with another company, and we signed it with Nestle. So that's the biggest food manufacturer in the world.
So you are going to buy very soon lollipops of meat?
Well, Nestle is doing a lot of things. Keep in mind, so this is important when you talk about the Israeli ecosystem, we should never forget Tivol.
Yeah, which was really one of the pioneer probably.
Tivol was one of the pioneers worldwide of soy meat alternatives, and it was bought by Nestle, and Tivol is actually leading the R&D of the entire Nestle group in plant-based alternatives. And this was not 5 years ago, this was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So keep in mind that Israel has a very historical place in food innovation.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Can I ask you to mention a little bit your other project, your other company that you are involved with? And I want the people not to mix the two companies that are two totally different, in totally different space. The one for screening of drugs.
Sure. So
maybe before that, I don't know if I should tell, but maybe before that I will tell the little anecdote about the talk you gave in Paris a month ago. That Kobe was invited to give a talk in a very large innovation conference in Paris called Vivatech. And Maurice Levy, who is chairing the event, asked if Kobe will be willing to be on the stage together with an American industrialist. You may have heard his name. His name is Albert Bourla. And then he called Albert Bourla, which immediately agreed or was interested to have a fire chat with Kobe. And these two gentlemen were on the stage for about an hour, which was really very interesting. So without telling any secrets, can you just tell us a little bit about what you are doing in that space?
Yeah, no problem. So as my family came from the Balkan area as well, my family is from Turkey, and Albert Bourla came from Saloniki. It was fascinating to meeting face to face on that stage and talk about drug development. So one of the things that, I have two passions, and one of them is future meat technologies, but the second one is a company called Tissue Dynamics I founded about 3.5 years ago. This company came to solve one of the biggest problems we have today, which is the insane cost of drug development. It costs about $2.6 billion to bring a single drug to the market, and takes more than a decade. And the reason it's so expensive is because all of the drugs we are developing are tested on small animals, so rat and mice. And we know for a fact that about 70% of the molecules that are effective in mice and rats are simply not effective or toxic to humans. This leads to massive failures in clinical studies and escalating costs. And there's a lot of examples. So aspirin, for example, is a very safe drug in humans, but cause horrible developmental toxicity in rodents. While if people remember thalidomide, that was the drug that caused birth defects in humans. In the 70s, that drug was very safe in rodents. But still, that's the best model we have. So that's what we're doing. What I did first in URL a decade ago, and now with Tissue Dynamics, is essentially use human models. So we're taking human cells, and we are using them to build models of the liver, the heart, the brain, the kidney, all the internal organs. And then we actually have sensors physically embedded in those organs that can monitor and essentially communicate with the organs directly. So we have these bionic microtissues sitting on a tiny, small microchip that is about the size of a quarter. And what we're doing is essentially mimicking a clinical study. So you give the drug and then you see exactly what is happening, and you talk with each one of those internal organs, and you figure out if the drug is doing something good or something bad to the tissue without using an animal, in a much more accurate model. So it's a model that has the genetics, the metabolism, and the physiology of the humans. It's kind of like driving your car and having a flat tire, and then without even feeling something, there's a sensor that lights up and telling you, watch out, you're losing air pressure. That's the type of system that we built. And it's a very unique system because it can tell you dramatic things on how drugs work or how disease work. And we managed to develop novel drugs for cancer, for COVID-19, drugs that are now in phase 3 clinical studies with excellent clinical results, for immunosuppressive therapy, all using this system, which is incredibly exciting.
Good. Now, I would like to ask you, why do you think Israel have this kind of phenomena of so many innovative people, so many new and advanced things? What is there? What is in the water, or what we give our kids to smoke that we have this development, this kind of phenomena? What is your explanation? You know, everybody has a different explanation.
Yeah. So my explanation is kind of, is based about creativity and experience. So there is a curve of how creative we are as a function of how much experience we're getting. So as you go through life, you get more and more experience. You do a lot of new things. And then at some point around the age of 40, 50, you did everything there is to do. So your experience flattens out. And I think creativity is the art of taking from one field and putting it in another. So as long as you're learning, your creativity goes up. And at some point, it also peaks roughly around 50, 60, even earlier. What is unique about Israel is that our kids, we go through incredible different experiences. So let me give you an example. In the United States, I had amazing students, some of the smartest kids I have ever known, but they went from high school directly to college without stopping. They took student loans. They went directly to college when they were 18. They did their PhDs when they were 21. Other than college, they had no life experience. And they end up in the job market at 25 and then go to a single job. Compare that to a standard Israeli. So a standard Israeli would go after high school to the army. They will learn one set of skills, either from computer programming to mechanical engineering to electronics, right? In the army, they learn command, they learn organization. At the age of 21, after the army, they're fed up and pissed. So they go to South America or India and they do drugs, right? So they spend a year abroad and they get a third life experience.
They are involved in drug discovery also.
Drug discovery of a sort. And then they go back to the university, and the university, we don't have student loans. So they have to work. So by the time I get a PhD student, they got one set of skills in the army. They got a second set of skills when they traveled the world. They got a third set of skills where they worked, right, during their undergrad, and then they have a degree. They are in their early 30s, and they are at their peak of creativity. And when they finish their PhDs or their masters, they go to the industry. They are at the pinnacle of discovery and the pinnacle of innovation because of life experience. And this is, I think, something very, very unique compared to other people in the world. There are very few countries that have such a layered educational system, right? Like it or not. And I think that creates very different type of individuals, very creative, very assertive individuals as well.
And what drove you to go to the Technion? You know, the Technion is not the easiest school on earth. Why did you decide that? Were you interested in chemistry when you were a kid? What was the mechanism that catapulted you to this trajectory of Technion and then Minneapolis and then Harvard? This is quite a demanding trajectory.
Yeah. You know, I say to the people I hire, one of the questions I ask in an interview is, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I tell them that the reason I'm asking is because I didn't figure it out myself, Yossi. I wanted to be an attorney first, and then I went to study computer science and then chemical engineering, and then that wasn't enough, so I did a degree in biology, and then did my PhD in biomedical engineering, and then moved to medicine, and then decided to be an entrepreneur. I didn't decide what I want to do when I grow up. I think I'm still undecided.
You must be. You know what you want to be when you grow up, or not yet?
Nope. Did you? I know you.
I'm still trying to figure it out. Yes. But there is no doubt that you have a very high level of curiosity. What drove, let's try to attack the question from another angle. What drove you to be so curious?
I don't know. I actually don't know. I was always reading a lot of books, and I think curiosity is
how we create that more kids in Bat will have this kind of curiosity. Let me explain to our audience. Bat Yam is like the model for middle class people which work hard to make a living. You know, they live very close to Tel Aviv, but they really have to work hard in order to make and meet. It's professional merchants, white collar people, blue collar people. And the question, the challenge of Israel is how you take this kind of communities and convince more and more kids to become Yossi Nahmias. And by the way, you should go to Bat Yam and talk to the youngsters there. I think this is your obligation, but this is a different story.
Yeah, we know that. It's interesting, it's an interesting question whether people are born with curiosity or you need to drive them there. At the very least, I think one of the things that you're doing, Yossi, which is incredible, is educating kids is what is possible. I think that some of the young generations in Israel, especially, the lower socioeconomic classes, they are not aware that it's even possible. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have and one of the obligations that we have for the communities that we serve to let those kids know what is out there, what they can achieve if they push. Especially in a country like Israel, where, the army is a great equalizer and the college is not that expensive. And I think that's going to be, a major driver.
Okay, I think that's a perfect point to ask Jonathan to run a short Q&A question. So, Kobi, thank you for this very inspiring talk and to your very inspiring career, which is really, really amazing. And Jonathan, I pass the mic back to you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Thanks. I mean, it really has been inspiring. And as you know, frankly, as a meat lover, as somebody who grew up in Australia, who grew up on meat, to know that that it's not going to be in short supply in the future makes me a very happy person. But really, I mean, there's been also a lot of, as Yossi also indicated, Yossi already covered many of the questions that have come in. So, but one sort of line of question really has been around the whole halakha side of it, about around the kosher question. Is this meat kosher? Is it not kosher? What makes it non-kosher if it isn't kosher? And I know that there was one person who actually found a ruling by Rabbi Dov Lior saying that the meat is kosher. But I'm curious to sort of hear I know that this is not your area of expertise.
No, it's fine, Jonathan. So let me answer that. So there are two halakha rules that are pertain to cultured meat. The first one is ever min achai. We're not supposed to eat, for example, a leg of an animal that is still alive. That's forbidden. Okay. So one of the things that Future Meat is doing is taking cells. So the first cells we're taking are being taken from animals that have been slaughtered in a kosher way. So essentially, we're taking cells from a carcass. We're taking it from an area that was discarded. Now, we only need to do it once. And then the cells are immortalized and grow forever. So we don't need to go back to any more animals. But because we took it from an animal that was slaughtered in a kosher way, all the products of that animal are kosher by definition. Okay? Now, it wouldn't work for pigs, but it works for all other kosher animals, right? So that is going to be one aspect. Ever min achai, we don't need to worry about it because we take it from an animal that was slaughtered once, and then they grow forever. The second question is whether it's parv or not. And there we have a halakha called batel b'shishim. The halakha says if something that is not kosher or if something that is meat, fell into a soup, but it's so tiny that you don't notice it, it's like 60 times diluted, then you can ignore it. The soup is still parv or the soup is still kosher. Don't throw it away. Here, the cells that we took from the animal 3 years ago were, a few milligrams. And now, you can make thousands of tons of it without any animal products. So it's beyond batel b'shishim. This is batel in billion, right? So here's a question. Is it still meat? Because everything else came from plants. And that's a very good question for rabbis everywhere. Because, one opinion, and we had some of some rabbis actually come here and say, well, then the meat needs to be parv because it's, diluted times a billion. But others are saying, well, they still give the flavor of the meat. So, it has to be meat. This is interesting, right? Because if it's not, then we are just making their first kosher cheeseburgers. And right after that, there's a possibility for the first kosher bacon. That said, the Hasidic movement is saying that when the Messiah arrives, all that was non-kosher is going to turn into kosher, right? Well, we're a company that came from Jerusalem. We might be just bringing the Messiah.
So, but it's interesting though, because according to your argument about the dilution, so then arguably also then the pig would then become so diluted that it should be kosher, even though maybe the original cell was from an actual live pig.
What, Kobe may ask, what you put in the reactor? What are the feeds to the reactor?
It's amino acids and vitamins, but they're all coming from plants or fungi. So plants or mushrooms or bacteria, they're all parv. Everything is animal component free. There are no animal products in there. So yeah, I agree, Jonathan, which is why, if that's the halacha, then you should start looking for white donkeys in and around Jerusalem.
Can you make them in the reactor?
White donkeys?
Yeah.
So, and another question that's come up really is, I mean, so you talk here a lot about the regenerating of the cells, essentially, and you talked before also about your other technology, about the test, the test beds, basically, for testing, that essentially you're using similar technologies of regenerating cells to be able to create these test environments. Do you see a situation where this technology can also be used for regenerating of human cells for also actual, essentially, implementation into the human body?
No. So let's be very, very clear. If you want to make a piece of skin or a piece of muscle that you're going to put in a patient, then you have to put, you actually have to put it from the patient's own cells, or at least from cells that don't elicit an immune response. And the tissue has to be functional and accurate. Okay? That's why it costs, $10,000, $20,000 to make artificial skin, artificial muscle. These are all technologies that my laboratory has been working on and other laboratories around the world. And there are a couple of companies that are already doing that. But if you're making meat, there's no reason to go there. There's no reason to go there. You can immortalize the cells, but at the end of the day, you can immortalize the cell. You don't need to make a muscle that is identical. It just needs to taste the same, right? It needs to smell the same. It needs to look the same, but it doesn't have to be identical. That's the only reason. It doesn't cost $10,000 a kilogram for us. Why it costs, at the end of the day, closer to $12, $6 per kilogram, right? Because we don't have to mimic the entire muscle. We don't have to emulate nature in cultured meat. You don't. So you're using a very different technology, at least for us.
And just for the
tissue
audience,
dynamics is a different concept. Tissue dynamics is doing drug development. And there, yeah, and definitely we're looking for drugs and we're looking for molecules that can enhance regeneration. So we're not talking about tissue engineering, because that really hasn't proven itself for the past 20 years. We're really looking for molecules in a more human-focused way.
okay, and just for the audience sake, when you talk about $12 a kilogram, so it's 2.2 pounds to the kilogram. So if somebody's trying to make the conversion,
It's about $6 per pound.
About $6 a pound, which is pretty much on par with what we see in the supermarket these days.
Yeah.
So, and then one final question is, oftentimes, when we do buy meat, it's not just the meat itself. You talked about the fat, obviously, which is an important component, but obviously, anyone who's had a good rib knows that there are also bones that are part of that. How do you deal with that?
So I actually have another company. It's called Moonsteak, and it's together with Tissue Dynamics is now raising funding, but now Moonsteak is raising funding as well. It's an injection molding technology that can do, from lamb chops to pork chops to T-bone steaks, if you can imagine, with the bones as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we can do that.
So all hope is not lost. That is great. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up for today. Once again, thank you so very much. Yossi, Kobi, thank you very much. I mean, this has really been fascinating and a really very interesting conversation.
Jonathan, can I use it to do a shameless promotion to our next talk in this series?
Go for it.
Okay, in few months, probably October, we are going to present here another interesting scientist from Hebrew U. His name is Jonathan Buchbut, and he is taking the smelling organs of mosquitoes and place them on electronic chips in order to create a sensor which can smell where humans or other creatures where they are located. this sounds really as another science fiction, so stay tuned, follow the AIFL program of Zooms, and we'll see you then. Another comment which I would like to suggest, if I may, I usually watch very carefully the number of participants in order to see the level of attrition of our audience, and I must say that during the whole talk, until the Q&A, only 2 people left the room, which is really outstanding. So Kobe, as I said, you should go into the presentation business, leave this nonsense of doing R&D and move to the real world.
Well, anyone who's been involved in M&A activity knows that essentially, I mean, and given just the number of rounds that Kobe has raised, knows that probably that's a critical part of the fundraising activity. So definitely, Kobe, you have it down to an.
By the way, we have, I understand, other hundreds of viewers which will watch it on Facebook, if I'm correct.
You are absolutely correct. Usually our average is about 12 to 15,000 people who watch each session. So we're definitely looking forward to seeing many people also log in through the Facebook website.
This was a little bit of shameless Zionist propaganda.
Nothing shameless about that. Thank you, Yossi. Thank you, Kobe. And
Thank you.
With that, also some additional sort of shameless propaganda. Please also join us next week to another virtual tour. This time up north, the sources of the Jordan River. Whoever loves the north, you know, and it's always going to those sources, to those water sources, is always an integral part of any trip up north. So please do join us for our regular monthly virtual tour, taking us all around Israel. Thank you once again. Thank you, Kobe. Thank you, Yossi, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.